bring in Neil Townsend, lead market analyst with GrainFox. Hey, Neil, how's it going?
It's going very well. How is it going with you?
Pretty good. The weather nice and summerly in Winnipeg.
Yeah, I mean, I think the weather is actually it's hot. And I think that what's happened in Western Canada is we started off more benign and now we've turned into definitely, is it a broad-based, completely Western Canada weather story? Maybe not, but certainly weather is becoming more of an issue. And it's the heat, the dryness. There are all the forest fires, so a lot of farmers contend that the smoke is a bit of a mitigating factor on the crops. I mean, time will tell, but we're definitely hearing a lot of anecdotes of crops maybe going the wrong direction. Again, I would say it doesn't add up to the entirety of Western Canada, and maybe we could still end up at around about an average yield, but I think the betting money right now would be below average, but keeping in mind that 2021 has really skewed the average. So maybe an Olympic average without 2021 in it.
Yeah, I like there is below average areas. Because I've heard it from farmers on the Farmer Rapid Fire, but you got to look at the map and see where they are. And you just can't talk to one person then extrapolate that across, a 200-kilometer radius. We have knocked back some yield from that optimum yield curve for sure, or where we thought the yield was going to be 4 to 6 weeks ago. And probably we won't know till we get those combines rolling to know how impacted we have been. I'm still hearing from a lot of growers that average to maybe a little bit more. I'm not hearing a lot below. Maybe in the southern tips of all three provinces where people are saying a little bit more of that below average, but this is this fun time. This is where there's opportunity because you have people betting in different directions on the market. So that's there's opportunity there for sure. I let off talking about hybrid rye. Do you have any rye market updates for us? Is that's a little bit off in the wilderness? How is that? Have you
Well,
followed the rye market at all?
a little bit. I mean, I think the thing with rye is that there's been some, as the winter rye came and, the harvest started and stuff like that, like there's been some immediate demand. But I think the rye market, like a lot of markets, it hasn't totally capitulated, but
Right.
it is keeping its eye very closely on what's happening with the corn in the United States. And that's one driver sort of as a cover crop down there. And I mean, as corn sort of goes down in value, I think it does call into question whether the rye demand will be as solid as it is for that one component of it, and that's probably a big issue. Is like there's a lot of contemplation in the United States just about corn, and like as long as the corn price kind of stays where it's sort of hovering, and
Yeah.
does that work for U.S. farmers? I mean, they're going to plant. Let me be clear, but I mean, there's going to be maybe some more disincentive, but there'll also be like a stronger urge to yield your way to freedom, so to speak, yield your way to profit. So I don't know how rye works into that exactly, but I do know that rye is sort of a little bit more of a mixed bag right now because of the circumstances in the corn market.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of commodities just looking at corn and really particular attention to where these closes are, right? That's what I continue to hear from a lot of people. We're if you look at that Dees corn market, for example, we're continuing to just bounce around that $4 mark, and I think everybody's a little bit on edge about it, to be honest with you, because everybody knows that no matter what commodity you're following, especially in the grains, all roads lead to corn. But maybe we'll come back to corn. Let's talk about canola. We've got November canola trading at the time of us doing this discussion about 623. What can you tell us about canola? As we talked earlier about, we have pulled back some of that yield expectation due to that heat at flowering time. What's the outlook on the market?
Well, I mean, again, I think that canola is one of those crops where there's a lot of doubt. Probably the crop, like we started off talking about the heat, and I think canola is the crop that we've heard the most about, where farmers have sort of said, I'm not sure how it's doing. I'm worried that it's drying out, that if a big wind comes, it might shatter. That being said, I don't think anybody has a really good perspective right now on what the yield is. It's very, very hard to count and calculate what your canola yield is just by looking and even by trying to get in there and pulling out the pods. I mean, it's a very inexact science. It's just too difficult to do. So it is a wait and see. I mean, I'm not expecting sort of a trend yield with canola. We have the average kind of at around, you know, like maybe around 37, but that calculates in the 2021 year. So the actual average is probably like if you had Olympic average it would be a little bit higher. But right now we're sort of contemplating a 38.5 bushel an acre yield, so a little bit above average. But again, we have had a lot of anecdotes telling us about worry. We'll see if that comes to fruition, right? The thing about the canola market, and it's interesting because we stalled out on corn to talk about canola, but I think there's some parallels between the canola and the corn market in the
Oh,
sense that
interesting.
there's storylines that are happening in other jurisdictions. And in corn, those storylines don't seem to be having an impact, or they're having an impact, and we're just too, we're too neutral to see just how bullish those storylines are impacting a market which might be down at around 350 or 330 without those storylines. So I don't know, but basically Europe and the Black Sea region have suffered both for oil seeds and for corn. The corn condition in places like Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, and southern Russia have been deteriorating due to like extreme heat and more or less a drought. Also, the same thing has damaged oil seeds such as sunflowers and the soybeans that are produced in those regions. And the canola crop, which is a winter crop in most of those areas, wasn't great. I mean, it wasn't as badly impacted, obviously, as the summer crops, but it was impacted. But the canola in the rest of the European Union, in France and Germany, in particular France, have had been really poor results. And they've been poor results both on a yield and a quality and an oil content side of things. So it's not a human food, obviously, in the European Union. It's an industrial product and an animal feed. But the thing is that, they are going to have a higher import need if they're going to fill their biofuels and all that with rapeseed. And the fact that sunflower and sunflower oil is going to be less available from Ukraine, for example, because their crop is being really devastated by this weather, also opens the door for incremental usage of rapeseed. So then you turn to North America, and yeah, the S&D in North America looks a little bit healthier. Again, it's one of these things with canola in Canada, is if you go and ask any of the line companies and lots of the independent analysts, somewhere along the line, they've deviated from Statistics Canada and added in like 2 or 3 million tons of production, or a mysterious 2 or 3 million tons that end up on the ending stocks from a year like in 2020 or 2019 or something. And they've carried that forward. So the straight Statistics Canada data looks more bullish than what all of the real operators, the guys with money, sort of think it is. So I think that's one thing that sort of weighs on the cash market of canola. But the futures are obviously multifaceted. They do a lot of things. They pay attention to the cash market, but they're also paying attention to the soybeans and the oil seeds and all that. And you can just see sort of the whipsaw moment we've been having since really middle of summer there. End of June or end of June, I guess the start of summer. Sorry, let me
Yep.
rephrase that. But the trend, I mean, we've kind of gone up and then down and then up and then down. It will be interesting on the next upswing, say, when we get better data on the harvest and sort of we cool down a bit on the bearishness in the soybean front. It'll be interesting to see if the next high is a higher high or if we don't do that, because we've
I
had
was
two
just
higher highs in a row.
I was just looking at that. I was just going to ask you about that. There's a positive indication there. If we can go, we can create a new high in the
Yeah,
short term. If you look at the 1 year chart on November canola, you can clearly see it. But at the so that's a bullish possibility to look at technically. But on the negative side, technically, you say, boy, I really hope that we don't have some sort of a trade below 600, because we continue to bounce off of that 600, and closing below that or pushing through that could be a real technical bearish indicator. So there's two ways to look at this chart.
absolutely. And I mean, I really think that soybeans hold the key. And soybeans are obviously, sitting and contemplating exactly what the situation is. And again, if we extend the time horizon beyond, say, just, October, when we might have the final results of the US crop. I mean, looming in the background is, the chance that South America has a more representative crop in 24, 25. And, that is going to be the real variable that shapes the second half of our marketing year, is what is the prospect for South America. And again, remember that we got helped by a lot of factors in 23, 24, drought and then severe flooding in southern Brazil, Argentine weather that wasn't optimal. So, they didn't come in with it was a huge crop, but not a massive crop. But the prospect for next year is like an all-time record and two very large crops, at least in Argentina and Brazil. And I mean, that does worry me because, people are sort of fretting over sort of $10.50, soybeans. But if the South American crop hits, and there isn't really a storyline in the US because, we're looking at a 350 to 450 million bushel carryout on soybeans. I mean, that is going to be a struggle. And then, of course, that will have an impact on canola. I mean, canola can only do so much on its own without kind of casting an eye on the alternatives like, palm oil, soybeans, sunflowers, as I mentioned. And obviously the key one is soybeans and then probably palm oil second. But, it's going to be an interesting year because I think things are set up for, something where we need some sort of signs of incremental demand.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we were kind of hoping for seems to be getting the can kicked down the road a bit, and that's this renewable diesel buzz, right? And there's still a lot of contemplation of what's going on in the US. I think the Chevron exclusion and, that kind of court case there has also raised the possibility that there'll be more sort of bogged down in the courts about the whole renewable diesel aspect, and that
Hey,
we
Neil,
won't.
former President Trump talking about how, the military using biofuels, or the Biden administration forcing the military to potentially use biofuels. And we're stopping that day one. That
Yeah, yeah.
all of a sudden people that are proponents of the SAF market are like, whoa, 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 hold on here, right? There's some concern again. So that creates some political risk in that market as well.
Yeah, I think there's tremendous political risk, broadly speaking. I mean, I couldn't call the US election right now. It seems too close. It seems like, I mean, I think the Democrats probably win the popular vote, but that's not how they decide who the president is. It's going to be very close. It's going to be contested. There might be a lot of litigation about that. We know that there's a friendly Supreme Court. But the bottom line is, the one thing that scares me the most as a trading country is there's a lot of discussion of, like, tariffs and trade wars and things like that. And I just think in general, even though you might think, well, Canada might benefit from, the US imposing a lot of tariffs on China, it just makes the world a lot less sort of, liquid, shall we say. It becomes more cumbersome, and it becomes more unpredictable, right? And so I hope that, if Trump does become the president, maybe some of his more, stronger talk on China. And again, I do think China isn't really playing fair in the realm of trade. So they need to be brought to heel a little bit, but I hope it's not like a blanket tariff on everybody. And, this kind of tariffs that they're thinking of imposing on China would cause a lot of friction. I like it better when he did sort of the phase one trade deal. It ended up being beneficial for everybody because it tightened the US ending stocks and raised prices for everybody. And so I prefer a negotiated settlement as opposed to, some sort of animosity or, a frictional kind of settlement.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I still think that the policy on how to deal with China is not that different in either administration based on what we've seen out of the USTR. And the other thing about the phase one deal that does concern me now versus then is that China was able to gobble up commodities based on their commitment in the largest grain contract ever negotiated, which was that phase one deal. Their economy is not the same as it was at that time. So they're not, those tariffs and those sanctions, they're going to impact China's economy even more in this case, which is actually what, I guess the US government is trying to accomplish. One of the crops that we don't talk about a lot, but I've been hearing a lot of noise from our audience, that is durum. And there is a thought out there, and this makes sense. Canada's a big, a big producer of durum in the world. It's an important crop, but it's grown in the more dry areas of Western Canada, and farmers are seeing their yield go back, on a day-by-day basis because of how hot and dry it's been. Some say a bushel a day, some say a bushel and a half a day, whatever. It's going down. Is there some buoyancy to this Durham market right now? How should we be looking at it?
Well, unfortunately, no, there isn't.
Oh, Neil, what? Come on, really? Oh
Like
crap!
there was just a Tunisian tender. Canada really wasn't a participant, but the back off to Western Canada would have been at best about $7.50 a bushel, which is, way below the market here. But it's indicative of sort of one of the big changes that's happened in the Durham market over the last year. Unfortunately, we've seen more participation from non-traditional exporters of the raw durum, one of them being Russia. And Russia is contemplated as maybe having done some of the business to Tunisia, but the main culprit is Turkey. And Turkey made a decision to sort of mill pasta out of regular wheat or just non-durum wheat and export their durum last year. And that had a pretty big impact on the market because Canada was on a short crop, and we just didn't get the level of sort of demand pull that we thought we'd see. And that seems to be what's going to maybe happen a little bit in 24-25 as well, with a couple changes. One is that supposedly the European Union has made a prohibitive tariff on Russian durum, so that won't access the European market, and maybe that opens the door for a little bit more incremental North American imports for Europe. Europe didn't have the greatest crops, although Spain had a bit of a bounce back. Morocco had a terrible crop. So in Western Canada, like early in the season, when we sort of had more like Garden of Eden conditions in your area and southern Alberta and southwest Saskatchewan, we were contemplating maybe having a 7.5 million ton crop of durum. That's off the table now, as you say. Like the weather conditions just haven't been favorable enough. Unfortunate for the individual farmers, but for the collective, I think having a little bit less durum, taking a million and a half off that number. So instead of a 7.5 million, maybe having like a 6 million crop, and our southern neighbors in the US suffering some of the same weather conditions. So them, instead of having a 3 or 4 million ton crop, maybe they'll have like a 2 million ton crop. That actually probably serves the market a little well. And having a little bit shorter exportable surplus probably serves Canada well. I don't think there'll be a broad-based repair in the prices until we see some indications about how crops look in the Middle East and in North Africa, sort of, Jan, Feb, March of next year. But it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. When I thought that their crop would be 7 to 7.5 million tons, I contemplated durum trading below spring wheat. But I think with the smaller crop and sort of the conditions remaining threatening, that prospect is probably diminished. I think durum will maintain some premium over spring wheat. But spring wheat is also a market where prices probably won't be as buoyant as they were last year. So, add in a little bit to that, and you're probably looking at, it's going to be hard to get double digits for durum consistently in 24-25,
Hey,
unfortunately.
let's broad brush it. I've got two decisions. I'm gonna
Okay.
take my lumps and I'm gonna move my durum crop off the combine,
Yeah.
or I'm gonna go old school durum grower and pretend like I'm growing canary seed. I'm going to put it in the bin and I'm just going to hold like and I know there's lots of strategies between all of that, but which one is probably, and obviously everyone's got different cash flow situations. I'm just, in the purest sense, which way am I going
Yes.
on those two strategies?
Well, I don't want to avoid the question, but I think a hybrid strategy of that.
Okay.
I think that there's always, when you're looking around the world, there is a lot of sort of unknowns, and the old Rumsfeldian quote, the unknown unknowns. And I mean, things can change. So I do think that there's enough durum that's going to try and get into the pipeline that probably selling right at harvest might not be the best strategy. So you might want to use your storage to kind of store it for a little while, or sell prior to harvest if you need cash flow. And I would kind of say move about 50% of your crop, and then the other 50%, but sometime before Christmas.
Yep.
And then the other 50%, I think you'd kind of play the longer game on it. And the reason I play the longer game is things can turn pretty fast, both in terms of political stability in some of the countries that we're talking about, but also in the weather conditions in those countries. And I think just if you look right now, like, you and I could do a whole half hour on just you throw out a country and I tell you what kind of extreme weather they're experiencing right now. Now, whether that's just because we're more informed than we were 20 years ago, or if there's in fact more weather circumstances. Like my good friend Dan Bassi just sent me a Twitter feed from China. And it's just a guy who shows you all the extreme weather that's happening in China. Like China is a big place, but I was just amazed that like in the last 48 hours, there's like heat of like 48 degrees in some places, extreme floods, like rivers that have never been that high. Like, I just mean, like, is that just because I'm more informed that's always been happening, or is it because, something is actually happening? So in the world of durum, because it's concentrated in areas that are already sort of very finite for how they're doing because they don't have high levels of water involved in it. I mean, the lack of water or extreme heat, I mean, we could see, the Spanish durum crop go really backwards next year again. We could see Morocco continue in this drought. We could see Algeria and Tunisia join them. And the one country that I'm focused on that could have some circumstances that, make it a little bit more bullish is Turkey. And again, Turkish weather conditions will start to matter as soon as we sort of flip the calendar. So I just think we're going to have to watch and wait and see because, the durum market has a lot of moving parts to it, but the overall, truth of the matter is that, we're sort of in a downtrend right now, which has started maybe, last year. But the one thing is that the Canadian crop, and we have to wait to see the final result, because the weather conditions in the durum areas still continues to be saying that it's going to be dry for sure
Hot.
and also hot. So, what the final yield is going to be. I mean, I don't think it's going to be like a disaster level kind of production, but it's certainly not going to be with a 7 to start it. And,
Yeah.
we'll see how low towards 6 we can get. And maybe it turns into a 5 million, 5+ million ton crop if these weather conditions hold. And again, poor result for individual farmers, but probably collectively for the durum industry in Canada, a positive price impact from that somehow.
Okay, Neil, I know you got to go. Final question. Okay. Give me the crop that you feel has the best story relative to higher prices. Is there one where you feel like, okay, here's the crop, here's the narrative. I'm not guaranteeing it, of course. There's no
Yeah.
guarantee in life except for death and taxes. But give me the commodity. What are you thinking?
Well, we covered canola pretty extensively, but I think the one that I'm going to say is, quality spring wheat. I think we saw great marketing conditions for spring wheat in 23, 24. Canada exported a lot of it. I mean, maybe the price wasn't quite as exciting or as sexy as the farmers wanted it to be, but we looked this year at the spring wheat market, and this is what we'd say, and just the wheat market in general, that okay, the US has a little bit more hard red winter wheat. They might have a slightly bigger spring wheat crop overall. They might have more exportable surplus. Will they export it? Probably not. It's very hard to get it out of there. And it's basically like it's the lowest price in the world. But people are not buying it right now. It's hard to get it out. It's hard to get it from the farmers, whatever. It's hard to get it. So Canada's in a unique position. And then we look at the European Union. I mean, the France crop is an absolute disaster and it's terrible quality. I mean, again, it's not, nobody's comparing French wheat to CWRS. I mean, that's like, I don't know if France is known for their wines or stuff like that, but I mean, it's like, you don't compare that to something like a Trader Joe's, some of the quality wine. But I'm just saying, like, basically the thing is that Canada's in a unique position. Russia's going to have less, Ukraine's going to have less, Romania is not going to have maybe as much as they contemplated earlier because the weather conditions. It remains to be seen what Australia is going to produce. There is a La Nina there. So I just think Canada has this unique chance to really keep going with this 450 to 550,000 tons of wheat pushing out every year. We're coming in with a relatively tight or almost a historically tight ending stocks for wheat in Western Canada. So I see that, relative to other crops, farmers are going to get a lot of phone calls on their wheat at some point in the year. I can't really say that prices are all relative. Obviously, if corn is going to be in that $4 range, that sort of caps the upside to wheat. But if we start to get into a situation where these weather conditions persist in the European Union, like we haven't seen the rainfall streak broken in France in any big way yet. If we are wet in the fall there, I mean, that would portend that the French wheat crop is under risk again. So we start to get into a period of time where people will be watching the weather conditions for winter wheat in the Black Sea and in France and in Germany and these places. And there could be a positive storyline, which then also increases the veracity with which people would want to buy the best thing. And then the final thing I'll say, we mentioned China. and you mentioned China and their economy and everything like that. Like one thing we just do not have great information on right now is what's the reality on the ground in terms of the Chinese crops. We keep hearing that they produced record crops, but who's telling us that? The Chinese are. But then you look at the weather conditions and all of the things that are happening there, and you kind of think, is this actually good for corn? Is this good for wheat? I don't think it's good for wheat. I don't think it's good for corn. Have they got some varieties we don't know about? So I would just say that, those crops also matter. And then the final one I'll say for wheat, and, we're coming into the season when we'll start to be talking about the Indian wheat crop, but India cannot afford to have a crop that starts to sizzle up in February and March of next year. So I would say for wheat growers in Canada, you should get a weather app that shows you the temperatures in the Punjab. And if those get to be like 45, 46, 47 on March 15th, which they've been the last few years, that's probably a good sign that eventually India is going to have to capitulate and become a global importer of wheat. And if they start to import, it's not going to be 1 or 2 million tons. I think it's going to be 5, 10, 15 million tons. And once they break sort of the reality that, they're facing a lot of struggles to be self-sufficient on wheat, that could be a perpetual thing that is very beneficial to the wheat market. But short term, I like wheat. Long term, I like wheat.
I like it. I like it. Awesome. I like when we're talking about prices going higher for some of the for the farmers out there. Hey, that is Neil Townsend with GrainFox. Make sure you go to grainfox.ca to find out more about this great product that Neil is a big part of. Hey, Neil, thanks for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Sean.